Friends, fellow citizens of this shared world, pause for a moment and listen. There are stories etched into the very fabric of history, not merely as records of what was, but as urgent warnings. Whispers from the past that echo with profound relevance today. Some tales are of triumph, others of tragedy, but the most vital ones are often those that reveal the fragility of our ideals. The subtle ways darkness can creep in when hope wanes and vigilance falters. Today I want to share one such story, a powerful, chilling narrative about how a nation battered and bruised allowed its despair to be twisted into a destructive force, and how a charismatic demagogue rose to power on the ashes of its broken dreams. It is the story of Germany after the Great War and the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. But more than that, it is a story about us, about the choices we make, the values we uphold, the eternal vigilance required to safeguard the precious gift of democracy. Imagine, if you will, Germany in the wake of World War I. The guns had fallen silent, but the silence was deafening, filled with the cries of a nation in agony. The war, a brutal, devastating conflict, had left millions dead, cities scarred, and an entire generation traumatized. Germany, once a proud empire, was now a republic, the Weimar Republic, a fledgling democracy born amidst chaos and resentment. It was a government struggling to find its footing, burdened by the crushing weight of defeat. In the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles, this treaty, imposed by the victorious Allied powers, was a source of deep national humiliation. Germany was stripped of territory, disarmed, and forced to accept sole blame for the war. The nation was saddled with crippling reparations payments that it could never hope to repay. The German people, already exhausted and impoverished, felt betrayed, not just by their former leaders, but by the world. Their once mighty nation was now seen as a pariah, its economy in tatters, its pride shattered. Inflation soared to unimaginable heights, rendering savings worthless and plunging ordinary families into destitution. The currency became so worthless that people used bundles of banknotes as kindling or wallpaper. Can you imagine the despair, the anger, and the feeling of utter hopelessness that gripped a nation? They were experiencing such profound economic collapse and national humiliation. In this fertile ground of despair, resentment, and a yearning for a return to greatness, dangerous seeds began to sprout. People yearned for answers, for someone to blame, for a savior who could restore their dignity and prosperity. It was into this volatile atmosphere that a figure named Adolf Hitler emerged. He was an Austrian-born former soldier, unremarkable in many ways, yet possessing an uncanny ability to tap into the deepest anxieties and prejudices of the German populace. Hitler didn't invent anti-Semitism. It was a dark current that had flowed beneath the surface of European society for centuries. But he masterfully exploited it, twisting existing prejudices into a venomous ideology. He blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat, for its economic woes, for the perceived moral decay of the nation. He wove intricate, baseless conspiracy theories, painting Jewish citizens as traitors, foreign elements, and manipulators, secretly controlling global finance and politics. For a populace desperate for simple answers to complex problems, and already conditioned by centuries of prejudice, these scapegoats offered a perverse comfort. They provided an external enemy, a target for all the pent-up anger and frustration. Hitler's rise was not instantaneous. He joined a small, obscure political group, the German Workers' Party, which he soon renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. What set him apart? What truly propelled him were his extraordinary, albeit manipulative, oratorical skills. He was a mesmerizing speaker, capable of whipping crowds into a frenzy with his passionate, fiery speeches. He didn't just speak to their minds. He spoke directly to their raw emotions, their fear, their anger, their wounded pride, and their yearning for belonging. He combined the potent brew of anti-Semitism with fervent nationalism, promising a return to German glory, a restoration of order, and a purging of all those he deemed enemies of the state. He offered a vision, however dark, of a strong, unified Germany, free from the shackles of Versailles and the perceived corruption of the Weimar Republic. For a time, the mainstream political parties dismissed him as a fringe extremist, a rabble-rouser whose ideas were too outlandish to gain widespread traction. But they underestimated the power of desperation. Then came the devastating blow of the Great Depression in 1929. The global economic downturn hit Germany with particular ferocity, wiping out what little stability had been achieved. Factories closed, unemployment skyrocketed, and millions were once again plunged into poverty and hopelessness. The fragile Weimar Republic seemed utterly incapable of responding to the crisis. Its coalition governments were unstable, constantly bickering, failing to provide tangible relief or a clear path forward. This was the moment Hitler had been waiting for. The Great Depression became his greatest opportunity. He capitalized on the widespread anger and disillusionment, presenting himself as the only leader strong enough to rescue Germany from its abyss. He offered simple, albeit brutal, solutions, scapegoats for blame and grand promises of national renewal. He vowed to defy the Treaty of Versailles, to rebuild the German military, and to create jobs through massive public works projects. His message resonated deeply with a populace yearning for decisive leadership and a return to national pride. While Hitler's star ascended, the mainstream parties remained paralyzed, unable to forge a united front or offer compelling alternatives to the growing chaos. The political center crumbled under pressure, leaving the Republic vulnerable and the people without clear leadership during their darkest hour. The left-wing opposition, particularly the Communists and Social Democrats, were tragically divided, fighting each other more fiercely than they fought the rising tide of Nazism. This internal strife created a vacuum, allowing the Nazi Party to present itself as the only viable option for a nation in crisis. Millions of disillusioned citizens, tired of political squabbling and economic hardship, began to turn to Hitler, seeking a way out of the misery. They did not necessarily embrace his hateful ideology in its entirety, but he offered action, a sense of purpose, and a promise of hope, where others offered only stalemate and despair. The promise of national unity resonated with a public desperate for stability and a new future. The culmination of this tragic trajectory arrived in January 1933. Despite the Nazis never winning an outright majority in a free election, the political elites, underestimating Hitler's true intentions and believing they could control him, made a fateful decision. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Once in power, Hitler moved with terrifying speed and ruthless efficiency to dismantle the very democracy that had allowed him to rise. Just weeks after his appointment, a mysterious fire engulfed the Reichstag building, Germany's parliament. Hitler immediately exploited this incident, blaming it on communist terrorists and demanding emergency powers to restore order. Under the guise of national security, fundamental civil liberties were suspended, including freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and the right to privacy. Thousands of political opponents, communists, socialists, and anyone deemed a threat, were arrested and imprisoned without trial. With emergency powers in hand, Hitler systematically consolidated his grip. He dissolved all other political parties, making the Nazi Party the sole legal political entity, abolished freedom of the press, ensuring that only propaganda favorable to his regime reached the public. He enacted increasingly harsh anti-Jewish laws, stripping Jewish citizens of their rights, their property, and eventually their lives. He eliminated potential rivals within his own party during the Night of the Long Knives, demonstrating that no one was safe. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer and Chancellor, the undisputed leader of Germany. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party is not just a dark chapter in history. It is a profound and terrifying warning. It reminds us of the incredible fragility of democratic institutions when faced with an angry, desperate populace. And a leader willing to exploit their fears, offer simplistic solutions, and scapegoat minorities. It teaches us that democracy is not a given. It is a precious garden that requires constant tending and vigilance, and the courage of every citizen to protect. This story compels us to ask ourselves, how do we recognize the seeds of hatred before they take root? How do we protect truth in an age of manipulation? How do we ensure that despair does not become a gateway to tyranny? The lessons of the past are not meant to paralyze us with fear, but to empower us with wisdom and resolve. They are a call to action, a reminder that the defense of freedom, justice, and human dignity is an ongoing, sacred responsibility for us all. Your all. Let this warning echo through time, inspiring us to build a future where such darkness can never again prevail.